Human beings rely so heavily on heuristics.
Oh, absolutely. We have to.
Right. Like we have these built-in cognitive filters, and they allow us to process this completely overwhelming world without just, burning out our nervous systems entirely.
Yeah, because if you had to consciously analyze every single piece of information, you'd be paralyzed.
Exactly. So we categorize everything. We see a creature with sharp teeth, and we immediately categorize it as a predator. We see a red light, we categorize it as a mandate to stop.
Right. It's automatic.
It is. And we do this with societal risks, too. When it comes to substances, we look to the state, to the legal system, to do all that heavy lifting of categorization for us.
We trust the labels.
Yeah. We trust that if something is truly existentially dangerous, there's going to be this unmistakable, flashing red warning label attached to it.
Which is a totally understandable assumption to make.
It is, but that reliance on external categorization raises a really deeply unsettling question. What happens to our internal threat detection when that official label gives us a false sense of security?
Oh, that's the danger zone right there.
It really is. When a substance carries a warning that reads more like, a caution than a lethal hazard, human nature just tends to habituate to the risk.
We let our guard down. We assume we can manage it.
Right. We assume it's a controlled variable. And by the time we realize the categorization completely failed to capture the actual biological reality of the threat, the damage is already so entrenched.
It's too late.
Yeah. And that brings us to the mission of our deep dive into the source material today. Welcome, by the way. I'm so glad you could join us for this.
Thank you. It's a really vital topic.
It is. We are looking today at this profound and honestly just deeply tragic piece of journalism by Corey Ross from The Independent.
Right. The Cost of Ketamine, a mother's fight for reclassification.
Yes. It is the story of Anne Morley. She's a mother from Wimborne, Dorset, who is currently fighting to change UK drug policy after enduring just the most agonizing slow-motion loss of her 22-year-old daughter.
Isabel Saffirson Morley.
Right, who went by Izzy.
Yeah.
And the source material here, it's just heartbreaking.
It really is. The piece is this stark examination of the massive chasm between legal classification and actual physiological destruction.
Yeah.
Because to really comprehend the policy battle that Anne Morley is waging right now, we have to first untangle the incredibly complex trap that her daughter fell into.
And it really was a trap, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. This wasn't a sudden, violent event. It was a very slow, insidious process. One that leveraged, societal misconceptions and some pretty unprecedented historical circumstances to remain totally hidden.
Hidden until it reached a catastrophic point of no return.
Exactly.
Well, let's start with who Izzy was. The source text gives us a very clear picture of her before this addiction really took hold.
Right, she was 22 years old.
22. Described by her mother as beautiful and smart, and crucially, she was working as an estate agent.
Which is such an important detail to focus on.
I think so too, because being an estate agent at 22, that requires a massive amount of outward-facing competence.
Absolutely. You're managing properties, you're guiding clients through some of the biggest financial decisions of their lives.
You're projecting absolute reliability. It is an industry that is built entirely on presentation and trust.
Which forces us to immediately discard all our preconceived notions of what severe addiction looks like.
Yeah, the cultural archetype of the addict.
Right. We have this image of someone visibly unraveling, someone who has completely lost their foothold in society.
Living on the streets, stealing, that sort of thing.
Exactly. But Izzy was the exact opposite of that archetype. She was maintaining this highly demanding, highly socially intensive career.
Which is wild to think about. The cognitive load required to compartmentalize a growing chemical dependency.
While simultaneously projecting all that professional competence, it's staggering.
It really is. It requires maintaining two entirely separate lives.
You're managing the physical and psychological toll of the substance in the shadows, and then you're, smiling and closing deals in the light.
And the article points out a really crucial detail about the timeline of all this. Izzy began using ketamine during the COVID lockdowns in 2020.
Right, the lockdowns.
And she managed to hide her addiction from her family for 3 full years.
3 years? That is a massive amount of time to hide something so consuming.
It is. 3 years of maintaining that dual existence. And I really want to dig into the sociology of that specific moment in time.
The 2020 lockdowns.
Yeah, because 2020 wasn't just a period of, being stuck indoors. It was the complete removal of the social panopticon.
Oh, that's a really good way to put it, the social panopticon.
Right, like all the passive observation that we just normally rely on, coworkers noticing you look a bit tired.
Or friends noticing your pupils are dilated.
Exactly, family members sensing a tiny shift in your mood. All of those everyday mirrors were just suddenly covered up.
Yeah, the lockdown environment really functioned as an incubator for this.
How do you mean?
Well, a nascent addiction, especially in its early stages, it requires secrecy. It needs a lack of accountability to really take root.
Ordinarily, the friction of just daily social interaction provides a natural check against secretive behavior. But the pandemic mandated isolation.
It forced everyone into these isolated bubbles.
Exactly, where our only interactions were mediated through screens. They were carefully curated and strictly scheduled.
You could just turn the camera off.
You could mute the microphone. You could present an entirely controlled version of yourself for, say, a 1-hour Zoom meeting.
And then the second the call ends, you just collapse back into whatever private reality you're living in.
Right. And by the time society finally reopened and those social mirrors were put back in place, her habit had had 3 years to solidify its architecture in her brain.
Wow. It makes you wonder, how many silent struggles were just germinating in those isolated pockets of the world during that time.
I'm sure the numbers are staggering.
But this brings us to the core argument of Anne Morley's fight. And it centers on the drug itself and how society perceives it.
Right. Ketamine is currently a Class B substance in the UK. And Anne argues that this classification creates a deeply dangerous misconception.
Particularly among young people.
Exactly. Because it sits a tier below Class A drugs, your heroin, your cocaine. It carries this aura of relative safety.
It's viewed as a party drug.
Yeah, something you can experiment with without risking total life-altering ruin.
But the thing is, the legal classification system is primarily designed to guide law enforcement.
Right, it's for the courts.
Yes, it guides judicial sentencing, resource allocation for the police. It was never intended to be the sliding scale of biological safety for the end user.
But that is exactly how the public interprets it, isn't it?
100%. And this is where your earlier point about heuristics really comes into play.
The cognitive filters.
Right. Young people are bombarded with information about risk constantly. When they see a Class B designation, their cognitive filter just naturally files it under manageable vice.
Rather than existential threat.
Exactly. The label itself inadvertently lowers the psychological barrier to entry.
So I understand the argument about the label lowering the barrier to entry for the user. That makes total sense.
Okay.
But I want to push back a little on the idea that the classification alone is responsible for blinding the family to what was happening for 3 years.
How so?
Well, families miss severe heroin and cocaine addictions all the time.
Right? Yes.
And those carry the terrifying Class A label, the flashing red siren.
So is it possible that blaming the Class B status is, at least in part, a way of dealing with the profound, just universal denial that comes with loving someone?
That is a very difficult but absolutely necessary distinction to explore here.
Because when you look at your child, your brain actively resists seeing a life-threatening addiction.
It does.
So does the label actually create a shield, or does it just provide a sort of convenient justification for the denial that is already inherently there?
Well, you are correct that denial is a fundamental human defense mechanism, especially within family systems.
A parent's mind will almost always default to the least catastrophic explanation for a child's shifting behavior.
So if a 22-year-old is lethargic, it's just stress from the demanding estate agency job.
Exactly. If she is irritable, it's just the general turbulence of young adulthood.
Right.
But here's the thing. The Class B classification validates and reinforces that inherent denial.
It gives it weight.
Yes. If a parent finds a substance or hears a rumor and discovers it's just ketamine, the societal narrative whispers that it's just a phase.
It's a club drug.
Right. It's something less terrifying than needles and track marks. So the label doesn't invent the denial, but it provides the denial with a state-sanctioned alibi.
A state-sanctioned alibi.
Yeah. It ensures that nobody in the ecosystem, not the user, not the peers, not even the family, is treating the substance with the absolute dread it warrants.
Not until the biological consequences become impossible to ignore.
Exactly.
And the biological consequences described in the source text, they are horrifying.
Truly grim.
Because this wasn't a psychological unmasking, right? It wasn't a moment where Izzy finally broke down, sat her mother down, and confessed.
No.
The addiction was revealed because her physical body, essentially began to self-destruct.
in ways that could no longer be hidden by a professional wardrobe or a zoom camera.
Right. The article details that Izzy developed a condition known as ketamine bladder.
Yes. And the medical reality of ketamine abuse is just brutally specific.
What actually happens? Because I think people hear bladder issue and they just imagine like a really severe urinary tract infection.
Oh, it is so much worse than that. While the psychological effects of the drug occur in the brain, obviously, the body still has to process and eliminate the chemical and all its metabolites.
Right, the waste products.
Exactly. And these metabolites are excreted through the urine. But the problem is they are profoundly caustic.
Caustic, like burning.
Yes, when someone uses ketamine heavily and consistently over time, they are essentially bathing their urinary tract in a corrosive substance.
Oh my.
It is a fundamental alteration of the organ's architecture.
The text mentions severe scarring, chronic pain, and profound incontinence. I want to unpack the mechanics of that scarring.
Right. So a healthy human bladder is this highly elastic muscular sac.
It expands.
Exactly. It is naturally designed to expand smoothly to accommodate fluid and then contract to expel it.
Okay.
But the caustic nature of these ketamine metabolites literally burns the delicate lining of the bladder wall.
And how does the body react to that?
The body's response to constant chemical burning is to lay down scar tissue. Fibrosis.
Well, and scar tissue isn't stretchy.
Exactly. Scar tissue is rigid. It has zero elasticity. So over time, as the scarring builds up, the bladder shrinks.
It becomes stiff.
Yes, it becomes stiff and loses its capacity to hold even very small amounts of fluid.
That sounds unimaginably painful.
The physical sensation is often described by these patients as feeling like their bladder is filled with broken glass.
Broken glass. Wow.
The urgency to urinate becomes constant, it's relentless, and it is excruciatingly painful.
The article provides two specific details here that just paint an incredibly grim picture of this reality.
Go ahead.
First, the incontinence was so severe that Anne Morley, her mother, was spending 500 pounds a month on adult incontinence pads for her daughter.
500 pounds a month.
And second, Izzy's weight plummeted to 5 stone, 9 pounds.
Which is roughly 79 pounds.
79 pounds. She became so incredibly unwell that she had to officially resign from her job as an estate agent.
We really have to view those two data points together to grasp the totality of her systemic collapse.
Right.
The financial metric, that 500 pounds a month on incontinence care, it translates the invisible pain into a tangible, everyday reality.
Yeah, I mean, think about what that means for your daily life at 22.
It represents an utter loss of bodily autonomy and dignity.
Every ambition, every social interaction, your entire career, completely derailed by your own failing anatomy.
Consider the psychological whiplash of that. She went from being this polished professional managing properties
To a young woman tethered to her home.
yes, dependent on expensive adult diapers just to exist through the day.
And then there's the weight loss.
Yeah.
79 pounds. That indicates that her entire body was just shutting down. I mean, it's starvation.
The extreme weight loss is a cascading effect of the chronic trauma.
How so? Just from the stress.
The intense, unending pain from the bladder scarring fundamentally alters the nervous system. Chronic pain heavily suppresses appetite.
Right.
Furthermore, the sheer physiological stress of enduring that level of continuous agony, combined with the chemical disruptions of the drug itself, consumes massive amounts of energy.
So her metabolism was just burning through whatever was left.
Exactly. The body is effectively eating itself in an attempt to survive the trauma.
The contrast is just devastating.
It is. The vibrant, independent young woman has been reduced to a fragile 79-pound patient entirely reliant on her mother for basic hygienic and medical care.
And this brings us to a deeply frustrating, just infuriating phase of the story.
Right, the medical intervention.
Because once the physical collapse occurred, the secret was obviously out. The family knew.
They could not know at that point.
And Anne Morley stepped in to save her daughter. Now, the article highlights that Anne is not just a concerned mother.
No, her professional background is critical here.
Right. Her professional background is in nursing, and she also worked as a flight attendant. She is a highly trained caregiver.
She knows how to read symptoms.
Exactly. She knows how to navigate medical environments. She knows how to advocate for patients.
But for 18 months, she fought a completely losing battle against the medical and mental health systems.
Her professional background really adds this layer of profound, tragic irony to the narrative, doesn't it?
It does. She possessed the medical literacy to look at her daughter's deteriorating physical state and understand precisely how dire the situation was.
She wasn't bewildered by the medical jargon.
Not at all. She knew the trajectory her daughter was on. But she found herself utterly paralyzed by systemic roadblocks.
And stated in the text that she repeatedly tried to get help and treatment for Izzy, but they were dismissed.
The exact quote from the article is that Izzy was written off as just a ketamine addict and ignored.
Just a ketamine addict.
Yeah.
That phrase carries so much destructive weight. It's another label, right? Another heuristic filter.
Exactly.
We talked about how the Class B label blinded the public to the danger. But here, the label of addict seems to blind the medical system to the patient's humanity.
And to the acute nature of their medical emergency.
How does that stigma actively alter the standard of care in a clinical setting, like practically speaking?
Well, it creates a very dangerous bias in the triage and treatment process.
Okay.
In a medical system that is perpetually overstretched and under-resourced, professionals are forced to make rapid, split-second judgments about who receives immediate intervention.
Right. Who needs a bed right now?
Yes. When a patient is branded with the label of addict, there is a pervasive, often subconscious bias that views their suffering as self-inflicted.
So the empathy just evaporates.
The medical crisis is viewed through a lens of moral failing rather than a physiological emergency.
Right.
This stigma creates a subtle but incredibly powerful devaluation of the patient's pain.
So they don't rush.
No. The urgency to intervene is dampened because the system perceives the patient as uncooperative or unreliable.
Or fundamentally responsible for their own destruction.
Exactly. It effectively mutes the alarm bells that would normally ring if a 79-pound woman with failing organs walked into a clinic under literally any other circumstances.
But the systemic failure here wasn't just about stigma. It was deeply entangled with the law itself.
Yes, the legal framework is crucial here.
The article notes that the coroner acknowledged Anne's desperate concerns that her daughter should have remained in the hospital.
Anne knew she was too sick to be discharged.
Of course she did. She's a nurse. But the coroner pointed out this devastating legal reality. Izzy was not detainable under the Mental Health Act.
Right.
And she had voluntarily declined referral to the community mental health team.
This is perhaps the most complex philosophical and legal chasm in the entire narrative.
It really forces us to confront the rigid boundaries of bodily autonomy, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Western medical and legal systems place a paramount value on the right of a competent adult to make your own medical decisions.
Including the right to refuse life-saving treatment.
Exactly. The threshold for the state to step in, strip an individual of that autonomy, and detain them against their will under mechanisms like the Mental Health Act is intentionally set incredibly high.
Right, because historically, the power to lock people up for their own good has been wildly accused. We don't want the state easily taking away freedom.
Exactly. To invoke the Mental Health Act, the patient typically must be demonstrating acute psychiatric distress, severe psychosis, or an imminent direct threat to themselves or others.
And that's usually interpreted in a very narrow, immediate sense, like actively trying to harm themselves right that second.
Yes.
But, I struggle with that definition of competence in this specific context.
It's a massive gray area.
Because if an addiction has literally hijacked the reward circuitry of the brain, if it has driven a person to starve down to 79 pounds and destroy their own internal organs,
Right.
how can the law look at that brain and declare it competent to refuse help?
It's a terrible paradox.
At what point do we acknowledge that the disease is making the choice, not the person?
That is the absolute agony of the caregiver's position. You are highlighting the fundamental inadequacy of our legal frameworks when dealing with severe late-stage addiction.
Because the law wants things to be black and white.
Yes, the law demands a binary categorization. You either have capacity or you don't.
But addiction isn't binary.
No, addiction is a complex, progressive erosion of priorities. Izzy was likely lucid. She could probably understand the literal words the doctors were saying to her.
She wasn't hallucinating.
Right. Legally, she possessed cognitive capacity. But her decision-making was entirely subordinated to the immense physiological and psychological demands of her dependency.
And her pain.
Yes. The medical professionals know she needs to be hospitalized. The mother, with all her nursing experience, knows she needs to be hospitalized.
But the patient says no.
And the legal architecture protects that no, even when it is demonstrably a fatal decision.
It leaves the family standing on the sidelines of a slow-motion tragedy, legally forbidden from pulling their child out of the wreckage.
It's truly devastating.
And we see the grim culmination of that autonomy in the text. On April 24th, 2025, this is just 2 days before she died, Izzy discharged herself from the hospital.
Against medical advice, presumably?
Yes. The source text quotes her telling her mother, "No more hospitals, Mom. I can't do it anymore."
Oh, wow.
Anne stated she knew her daughter was dying in those final 48 hours. It sounds like a total surrender to just absolute exhaustion.
It is the point where the physiological burden and the psychological exhaustion simply exceed the human capacity to endure.
But this is where the source material takes a turn that deeply, deeply challenges our assumptions.
About the cause of death.
Yes. Because when you read a headline about a young woman dying after a severe hidden addiction to ketamine, the immediate assumption is that she died from a ketamine overdose.
Naturally. The label of addict leads us to expect a very specific, familiar conclusion.
Right. But the coroner, Brendan Allen, determined a drastically different cause of death.
He ruled it was respiratory depression due to combined severe morphine and gabapentin toxicity.
And this specific pharmacological reality, it fundamentally alters how we must understand her death.
Completely. Morphine and gabapentin are not illicit street drugs in this context.
No, they are powerful, legally prescribed medications.
Exactly.
So let's break down the mechanics of those two drugs, because understanding how they interact is so crucial to understanding the tragedy here.
Okay.
Why were these specific medications prescribed in the first place, and how do they combine to cause respiratory depression?
Well, the medications were prescribed as a desperate attempt to manage the excruciating chronic pain caused by the ketamine-induced scarring of her bladder.
Right, the feeling of broken glass.
Yes. So, morphine is a potent opioid analgesic. It works by binding to opioid receptors in the central nervous system, effectively blocking pain signals from reaching the brain.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, one of the primary side effects of opioids is that they depress the respiratory drive in the brainstem.
Meaning what exactly?
They literally slow down the brain's signals, telling the lungs to expand and contract.
Oh, wow. So your body just forgets to breathe as often.
Exactly. Now, gabapentin, on the other hand, is an anticonvulsant, but it is widely and very effectively used to treat neuropathic pain, nerve pain.
So you have one drug dulling the general pain receptors and another trying to quiet the damaged nerves in the bladder itself.
Correct. But gabapentin also has a sedating effect on the central nervous system.
Ah.
When you combine gabapentin with an opioid like morphine, you introduce a dangerous synergistic effect.
Synergistic meaning they amplify each other.
Yes. The gabapentin acts as a force multiplier for the morphine. It significantly exacerbates the opioid's depressive effect on the respiratory system.
Wow.
The coroner found that both drugs were present in her blood at higher than normal therapeutic levels.
So she was taking a lot of them.
The combination of these two central nervous system depressants essentially quieted her brain's drive to breathe until her breathing simply stopped.
And the coroner made a very specific ruling regarding her intent with these pills.
Yes, he did.
He ruled the death a misadventure, not a suicide.
That distinction is vital.
He concluded that she likely took more than the prescribed dose to alleviate her unbearable pain, not with the intention of ending her life.
Right.
The article even notes she had expressed a desire to get well. She spoke of a future where she could help and support others. She didn't want to die. She just wanted the pain to stop.
Her intent really highlights the profound tragedy of the situation. She was actively trying to survive the physical wreckage of her addiction.
She was just trying to get through the day.
The escalation of the dosage was a desperate attempt to achieve a baseline level of comfort. It was not a desire for oblivion.
And the coroner provided a summary sentence that serves as the intellectual anchor for this entire deep dive.
Right.
He stated, and I quote, "Without the sustained ketamine use, she would not have experienced the significant pain that led to the long-term use of opiates that exposed her to the risk of overdose."
That statement is a masterclass in establishing systemic causality.
Because he refuses to look at the toxicology report in isolation.
Exactly. He traces the pharmacological endpoint all the way back to the initial behavioral cause.
You know, it makes me think of an architectural collapse.
How so?
Well, imagine you have a building and you remove a load-bearing column on the ground floor.
Okay.
The roof doesn't fall immediately, right? The weight just shifts. The stress transfers to secondary support beams that were never designed to hold that much weight.
Right, they're compensating.
Exactly. Eventually, weeks or months later, the roof caves in.
Because the secondary beams snap.
Right. And if you just look at the rubble, you might blame the secondary beams for snapping. But the true cause of the collapse was the initial removal of the ground floor column.
That's a very apt analogy.
Ketamine was the removal of the column. The drug didn't directly shut down her lungs, but it destroyed her bladder.
Which shifted the weight.
Exactly. That structural failure shifted an impossible burden onto the pain management system. The medical system tried to brace the collapse with morphine and gabapentin, but those medications couldn't hold the weight of the agony without snapping.
That is a highly accurate conceptualization of what happened. The lethal toxicity was an iatrogenic effect.
Iatrogenic?
Yes, meaning an adverse effect caused by medical treatment.
Right.
But that medical treatment was necessitated entirely by the illicit substance. It forces us to really broaden our definition of what drug-related mortality actually means.
It's not just the immediate overdose.
Exactly. The danger of a substance isn't strictly limited to its acute lethal dose. The danger includes the cascading medical interventions required to manage the physiological damage it inflicts over time.
And because of this complex, undeniable chain of causality, Coroner Brendan Allen and the Morali family are now utilizing a unique legal mechanism to try and force a change.
Yes, the Regulation 28 report.
The source material outlines that Anne and her barrister, Antonia Jameson, are pressing the coroner to issue a prevention of future deaths report.
Right.
The family's stated goal is that something good to come out of this horrific situation. They want the government to reclassify ketamine from a Class B to a Class A drug.
Which is a massive policy shift.
It is. Can we explore how this reporting mechanism actually functions?
No.
Like, how does a coroner, whose job is to examine the dead, influence national policy for the living?
It's a fascinating process. The Prevention of Future Deaths report, which, as I said, is often referred to as a Regulation 28 report in the UK, is one of the most vital proactive powers granted to a coroner.
Proactive, meaning they don't just file the death certificate and move on.
Right. A coroner's primary duty is to determine the who, when, where, and how of a death.
Okay.
But they sit at this really unique vantage point. They are positioned at the very end of society's failures.
The bottom of the waterfall.
Exactly. They see the lethal, ultimate consequences of systemic blind spots, or unsafe products, or inadequate policies.
So they see the patterns.
Yes. When a coroner identifies a recurring risk during an inquest, a factor that, if left unaddressed, could lead to more fatalities, they have a statutory obligation to issue a report.
And who does this report go to?
It is sent directly to the individuals, organizations, or government departments that actually possess the power to mitigate that risk.
So it transforms the coroner from a mere medical examiner into a systemic whistleblower.
That's a great way to describe it.
They are taking the data gathered from tragedy and actively forcing the government to look at it.
Precisely. And it mandates a formal response from the receiving body.
Oh, so the government can't just throw it in a filing cabinet.
No, they cannot simply ignore it. They must explain on the record what actions they are taking, or they have to justify why they are choosing not to act.
Wow.
The Morley family is hoping that Coroner Allen will formally draft this report, explicitly linking the Class B status of ketamine to the widespread misconception of safety that ultimately led to Izzy's death.
And there is recent precedent for this, isn't there?
Yes.
The article notes that Coroner Allen confirmed he submitted a similar report to Home Secretary Yvette Cooper earlier in 2025.
Following the death of a 28-year-old woman named Gemma Weeks.
Right. And he also acknowledged that other coroners across the country have made similar recommendations regarding the dangers of ketamine.
Which is significant. Multiple coroners identifying the exact same lethal pattern elevates the issue from an isolated tragedy to a clearly identifiable systemic risk.
Now, we must approach the actual policy debate here with strict neutrality, relying solely on the facts presented and the broader context of drug legislation.
Of course.
The family's logic is very clear and, frankly, intuitive. Reclassifying ketamine to Class A means a harsher legal penalty.
Right.
Which translates culturally into a stronger warning label, which theoretically deters young people from trying it, ultimately saving lives.
That is the argument.
However, the article also states a crucial factual reality. Despite these past reports from coroners, the government previously made the decision not to upgrade ketamine's seriousness.
That is the immovable friction point in this narrative.
Why would they refuse?
Well, the government's resistance to reclassification is not necessarily rooted in a denial of the drug's harm.
Okay.
Rather, it's rooted in the incredibly complex mathematics of national policy. The drug classification system must balance multiple, often competing priorities.
Like what?
Upgrading a drug to Class A requires significant shifts in law enforcement resources. It alters the criminal justice outcomes for users.
Meaning potentially criminalizing young people much more severely for possession.
Exactly. And it can also severely impact the medical research community. Ketamine is heavily researched right now for its legitimate psychiatric and anesthetic applications.
So making it Class A makes it harder for scientists to study it for treating depression and things like that.
Yes. The government has previously weighed the coroner's warnings against these broader societal, medical, and legal implications and determined that the current Class B classification remains the appropriate legal framework.
Man, it is just a staggering tension.
It truly is.
On one side, you have the raw, just unquantifiable grief of a mother who literally watched her daughter waste away to 79 pounds.
A completely preventable tragedy.
Right. And on the other side, you have this slow, massive, calculating machinery of a government trying to balance national resources and criminal justice impacts.
The very cold calculus.
So my question is, if multiple coroners are flagging this to the Home Secretary, and the government has previously declined to act, what does it take?
That's the question, isn't it?
How many prevention of future deaths reports? How many shattered bladders? How many grieving families must be stacked on the scale before the balance finally tips?
It reveals the harsh reality of how policy actually evolves. Structural change is almost never swift.
And no, it rarely is.
And it is frequently built upon a foundation of accumulated human tragedy. The coroner must decide if the highly specific, cascading nature of Izzy's death adds enough weight to warrant another attempt to force the government's hand.
The journey from the perceived safety of a Class B drug to severe organ damage to an agonizing catch-22 of medical autonomy.
Ending in accidental pharmacological toxicity, yes.
As we synthesize the journey we've explored today, the sheer scope of this tragedy is difficult to process.
It covers so many different systemic failures.
It does. We started by looking at how human beings rely on categories and labels to keep ourselves safe.
It's heuristics.
Right. And we explored how a young, highly successful estate agent fell into an invisible habit during the unprecedented isolation of the 2020 lockdowns.
Masked entirely by the societal assumption that a Class B substance is somehow a manageable risk.
And we tracked how that psychological categorization completely failed to account for the caustic, biological reality of the drug,
resulting in catastrophic fibrosis of her bladder.
The narrative then moved through the agonizing systemic paralysis of the medical system,
where stigma blinded the triage protocols.
And the legal rigidity of the Mental Health Act forced a trained nurse, a mother, to just watch her daughter suffer without being able to intervene.
And finally, that tragic, ironic conclusion.
A young woman who explicitly did not want to die,
succumbing to the respiratory depression caused by the very prescription medications designed to ease the agony inflicted by the illicit drug.
A complex architectural collapse of the body and the medical system, culminating in a mother's desperate fight to use the coroner's office to change the labels that society relies on.
It is a narrative that demands we look much closer at the intersections of law, medicine, perception, and addiction.
It really challenges every simple assumption we hold about how and why people succumb to substance abuse.
It absolutely does.
Well, we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Navigating topics this heavy requires a willingness to sit with uncomfortable truths and very complex realities.
It's not easy material to process.
No, but unpacking these intricate chains of causality, understanding the mechanics behind a coroner's report, or the pharmacology of pain management, or the hidden toll of systemic stigma, it makes us more literate in the struggles of the world around us.
It sharpens our empathy.
Exactly. And as we close, I want to leave you with a final thought to consider, sort of building on the core theme of our discussion today.
Okay.
We have spent an hour dissecting how a national government labels a risk, and how that official label can foster a deadly illusion of safety.
The Class B trap.
Right. But turn that lens inward. Think about the labels you apply in your own life to navigate your daily risks.
We all have them.
We do. Whether it is a mild recurring physical symptom you've been brushing off, a minor bad habit you assure yourself is totally under control,
or a toxic dynamic you label as just complicated.
Exactly. How often do the categories we invent for ourselves serve as a convenient shield against reality? and what slow, cascading structural damage might be happening right beneath the surface simply because you've convinced yourself that the label you chose means you are safe.